Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Reiser in for Vladimir Duthier. We are watching all of the stories coming into the CBS Broadcast Center from our partners here in the U.S. and around the world. If it's happening, we're going to take you there live. This is CBS News 24/7. Hurricane Beryl is now the earliest Category 5 storm on record, and it is unleashing dangerous winds and storm surges across the Caribbean. Plus, the day after the bombshell Supreme Court ruling over presidential immunity, what this means for the legal cases against Donald Trump and how the White House is responding. And hundreds of firefighters are battling multiple wildfires in Greece as residents are evacuated across 2 islands. But we are going to begin with Hurricane Beryl. Overnight, it became the earliest storm on record to reach Category 5 status in the Atlantic. Winds are strengthening right now to 165 miles an hour. Yesterday, the storm slammed parts of the eastern Caribbean, bringing strong winds, storm surge, and coastal flooding. CBS's Tom Hansen is in Jamaica with the latest. So, Tom, first of all, I just want to get a sense of how Jamaicans are preparing and what you're experiencing right now.
Yeah, Lindsay, well, the vibe here is pretty calm at the moment. And I just want to show you, take a look at this beautiful ocean behind me. This is about the last chance you're going to get to see these sunny skies and this clear sea for the foreseeable future. That's because Beryl is about to barrel through the area, bringing with it those powerful rains and those strong winds that could lead to some catastrophic damage. Now, the people here that we've spoken to, it's pretty much business as usual for the time being. They are going about their day-to-day. We spoke to one business owner who says he's not particularly worried. There is a wedding that is scheduled here tomorrow. We just spoke to the bride and groom. They plan on moving it inside if the situation begins to deteriorate to a degree where it's not safe for them to have the wedding out here, and also to obviously get those great photos that they want so much. But, you know, the mayor of Montego Bay, he's saying this is not a cry wolf situation. This is something that we need to take very seriously. He says the town of Montego Bay is 100% prepared for whatever comes. Yesterday, to our surprise, there weren't a lot of signs that people were preparing to the extent of boarding up windows, taking some of the things that could become projectiles in the air off the streets of Montego Bay. We expect that that's going to change because we're going to head back into town to see if people are taking this a little more seriously now that it has become a Category 5 storm. And like you said, a historic storm that is going to set its sights on Jamaica, Lindsay.
And what are we seeing in terms of damage, Tom?
Well, you know, obviously the storms barreled through those smaller islands out east, you know, a ways away, which is kind of a bellwether for what could be the case here in Jamaica, although people here are really hoping that that does not happen, that this only clips the island. So far, no damage in Jamaica because the storm hasn't gotten here yet. That is really going to pick up tomorrow morning. That's when we're going to be watching this forecast very clearly to see what happens on the eastern side of the island. Now, Montego Bay, just for a little bit of context, we are on the western side. This is a little bit more of a sheltered area. There's a mountainous terrain that should and could break up this storm just a little bit so it doesn't get hit so hard on the western side, but on the southern and the eastern side, that's where we could really see a devastating impact if that storm surge and those dangerous winds end up coming ashore, Lindsay.
Okay, Tom, stay safe, guys. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with a look at the national forecast. Andrew?
Yeah, Lindsay, we are taking a look at Beryl first and foremost. And while it is not any immediate threat to land here in the continental U.S., we are going to be looking at it impacting your travel plans. If you have any plans to head to a cruise ship down to the Caribbean, we're going to be looking at flights delayed, likely canceled for areas across much of the Caribbean, of course, including Jamaica. So let's take a look at the latest with Beryl right now, because what we're going to see here is a very, very large storm. We've got the Windward Islands right here. So these, are, of course, are the first areas that were affected by the monster storm. Currently, right now, you can see the very well-defined eye. That will continue over very warm water. So while we may see it weaken and re-strengthen a little bit, it is likely to stay a 5 to a 4, at least over the course of the next 12 to 24 hours. At the very latest right now, the max winds on this storm are 165 miles per hour. It doesn't get much stronger than this. And when you take a look at some of those gusts, almost up to 200 miles per hour. Let's talk about the latest track on this because we have watched it move across very warm water, and that will continue. Now take a look. By the time we get into this afternoon, winds of 155 miles per hour and may get back down to a Category 4 hurricane. But again, we are watching this very carefully for Jamaica because by the time we get into Wednesday morning, the big question is going to be, does it take a direct hit? Does it go a little further south or a little further north? It's better if it hits a little further north of the island because the northern part of the storm is usually the strongest. So if it goes a little further south, we're looking at likely the biggest storm surge and the most damage. Now, beyond that, it does look like it's setting its sights by the end of the week for the Yucatan Peninsula. This would include areas like Cozumel and Cancun. Now, even though it would be a weakened hurricane at this time, we're still looking at a lot of heavy rain, gusty winds, and of course, that devastating storm surge. This will be one for the record books. We're going to continue to keep a look on this. Coming up in a little bit, Lindsay, we're going to go over not just what the rest of the week and the upcoming weekend has in store for Beryl, but also our holiday travel forecast across the continental U.S. We'll talk about that, pinpoint where we can see some severe thunderstorms, and of course, get you ready for a couple of big travel days ahead.
Okay, Andrew, thanks so much. Well, residents in Waterville, Minnesota are still operating in emergency mode after historic flooding submerged homes and entire neighborhoods. So CBS News Minnesota reporter Pauline Lee has the latest on cleanup efforts.
I'm Pauline Lee in hard-hit Waterville, Minnesota, where residents here are trying to clean up and trying to dry out with more rain in the forecast. Take a look at the roads. Some of the roads are still underwater more than 2 weeks after the flooding here started. Federal dollars are coming here to help in the recovery efforts, but more help is needed. As FEMA says, 95% of the residents here are uninsured. Just 33 flooding policies are active here in Waterville. We'll send it back to you.
Thank you. Well, the ripple effect from the Supreme Court ruling on immunity is growing today. President Biden condemned the decision last night, saying it undermines the rule of law.
Today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States.
Nancy Cordes joins us now from the White House. Nancy, what was the president's goal with this address?
I think there were a few goals here, Lindsay. First of all, as you heard, this was a real broadside to the Supreme Court ruling, arguing that the Supreme Court had really expanded the powers of the presidency beyond what the founders had intended. He said he plans to stick by the limits as he understands them of the office, but he really turned it into something of a campaign argument. He said that Americans now need to decide whether they are comfortable with the idea of Donald Trump returning to the Oval Office, given that, in Biden's words, he overstepped those bounds once before and would feel emboldened to go even further in another term. And then I think there was an overarching goal here, the president wanting to wade into an issue of the day, give a forceful speech, show the American people that he is feeling better after whatever happened to him last Thursday night, and that he's still got some fight in him for the campaign to come.
About that campaign to come, Nancy, what are we hearing from Democrats, both publicly and behind closed doors, about the state of the campaign right now?
Well, there are a few more elected Democrats who have been willing in the past 24 hours or so to say publicly that they have some concerns, ongoing concerns about President Biden and his health. We heard it from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island in an interview up there. We heard it just this morning from Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois, saying that this is a decision for President Biden to make, but that what happened on Thursday night, people can't fool themselves, was not a one-time thing. And he has concerns about what it could mean for Democrats down ballot in November. I think this is an indication, Lindsay, that as hard as the campaign is working, as hard as the White House is working to address concerns behind the scenes, to tell everyone that everything is okay, those concerns persist. And the fact that you have more Democrats willing to come out and say so publicly is not a great sign for this president.
Perhaps opening the door for even more. We'll be tracking that. Nancy, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Kenyan police are firing back at anti-government protesters with tear gas in the city center of Nairobi. Now, this unrest began over a controversial finance bill that increased taxes in the country. Now, protesters are calling for the president to step down or be removed. Human rights groups say so far 39 people have been killed by security forces in the protests. Authorities in India say nearly 100 people are dead after a stampede at a religious event earlier today. This happened in a village about 125 miles southeast of the nation's capital of New Delhi. And video shows people carrying people in stretchers into a hospital, and this death toll has increased throughout the morning. So we're going to track these updates and bring you more as we learn them. Israel has carried out strikes in southern Gaza after ordering residents to evacuate in the area. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more from Tel Aviv. Holly?
Good morning, Lindsay. Israel's military has ordered a mass evacuation of Palestinians from the eastern part of Khan Yunis. That is the second largest city in Gaza in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Now, the evacuation order was sent via audio message on cell phones and via social media, and thousands of people have already begun to flee their homes. Meanwhile, 8 Palestinians were killed in Khan Yunis in an Israeli bombardment. That's according to Hamas health officials. Now, the evacuation order is being seen as an indication that Israel could launch a new ground assault in that area as it pursues Hamas militants. Khan Yunis was badly damaged, parts of it destroyed in the earlier stages of the Israel-Hamas war. The evacuation comes after a barrage of around 20 rockets was fired from Khan Yunis into Israel. That's according to Israel's military. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, quote, "We are advancing to the end of the phase of eliminating the terrorist army of Hamas." The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the new evacuation order, quote, shows yet again that no place is safe in Gaza, and he called again for a ceasefire. The death toll in Gaza now stands at nearly 38,000, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Lindsay.
Holly, thank you so much. And let's take you over to the UN right now where they are discussing the situation in Gaza. Let's listen.
Palestinian children with serious illnesses and their accompanying adults from Gaza to Egypt via the Kerem Shalom, Kerem Abu Salam crossing, discussions are ongoing to establish a more regular and predictable system of medical evacuations for patients, facilitated by WHO. In view of the immense need, I consider this a priority and ask for your urgent attention and support. Mr. President, in line with the resolution, a sustained flow of assistance to Gaza is needed to deliver quantity and quality of goods throughout all land and sea crossings, including the Rafah border crossing. This requires a continued focus. The ability of the UN and humanitarian partners to operate safely and securely inside Gaza is equally important in view of the ever-growing risks. Since the start of the Israeli military operation in Rafah and the subsequent closure of the Rafah border crossing in early May, the volume of aid entering into Gaza or being distributed across Gaza has dropped significantly. Military activity and the lack of safe routes inside Gaza continue to severely impact humanitarian operations. A near total breakdown of civil order has further led to an environment of lawlessness and criminality. This worrying trend further hampers the UN's ability to deliver on its mandate. Many of you will be familiar with images of supplies accumulated at Kerem Shalom, Kerem Abu Salam crossing. The UN has asked Israel to find solutions to enable this safe delivery of aid that includes its distribution. Aid that should be reaching Palestinian civilians across the Gaza Strip. Since the 26th of May, trucks from Egypt have temporarily been rerouted via Kerem Shalom, Kerem Abu Salam. To further the reopening of the Rafah border crossing, my mission has submitted proposals to the parties with regards to possible reopening of the Rafah border crossing based on options provided. Mr. President, urgent action remains required with regards to the following: the establishment of an effective, credible, and predictable deconfliction and coordination system across Gaza. Discussions on this matter are currently underway, as you know. Continued access to all security and communication equipment, as well as the critical humanitarian items needed for the delivery or repair of basic services. Route clearance from mines and unexploded ordnances, and the approvals urgently needed to undertake these assignments. Pre-positioned storage and the movement of the daily needed volume of fuel. Import of spare parts and relevant maintenance equipment. And concerning the diversification of routes, as well as the sustainability of supplies,
we have been listening to Sigrid Kaag. She is the UN Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, talking about the need for humanitarian aid to reach the residents of Gaza, including through the southernmost crossing in Rafah, and plans to get supplies into the enclave. We're going to continue to monitor this and bring you news as it develops. Well, newly released documents show prosecutors knew Jeffrey Epstein was abusing minors long before his plea deal. Coming up, the stunning new details from the transcripts about his alleged crimes. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Prosecutors in Massachusetts say they will retry Karen Reed after the judge declared a mistrial in her murder case yesterday. Now, the jury wasn't able to reach a unanimous verdict. Reed is accused of running down her police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe, with an SUV and leaving him to die in a snowstorm in 2022. Reed says she was framed. CBS Boston reporter Penny Commit has been following this trial for us. So, Penny, I understand you've spoken with at least one of the jurors in this case.
Lindsay, that's right. We spoke with one juror. She was the alternate juror, so she wasn't one of the 12 deliberating jurors, but she did sit through every single day of this trial, which lasted, as we know, over 2 months, over 600 pieces of evidence, 74 witnesses. She said that she wasn't there in the room, but that the jurors got really, really close. They celebrated birthdays even because this trial lasted so long, and that if she would have been a deliberating juror, she would have declared Karen Reed not guilty. Now, the jurors reaching a complete deadlock, unable to reach a unanimous verdict in this case. That's what led to that mistrial. And actually, the note that the judge got from the jurors, she said it was something she had never seen before. The jurors sent the judge a letter saying not only are they deadlocked, but they were, quote, deeply divided, that at their core, they really had different beliefs of what happened in John O'Keefe's death. That was Karen Reed's police officer boyfriend. So a very tough decision for the jurors. They weren't able to reach that verdict. And I got to say, it leaves kind of an emptiness in the air here in Massachusetts. This trial really divided the community. I mean, people telling me they lost friendships over this trial, severed ties with their family members because of different opinions in this trial. So to not have an answer, to not have some type of closure, of course, is going to be, I can't even imagine how difficult for John O'Keefe's family. It's going to be hard for Karen Reed herself and the entire community. We were hoping for an answer. Maybe we'll get it with this retrial, but the jury, very reflective of the community. They were totally divided. The community out here totally divided. We'll see what happens in the coming months.
Yeah, we will be watching for that hearing at the end of July as well. Penny, thank you. We are getting a look at newly released secret transcripts, including one from one of Jeffrey Epstein's underage victims, in which a prosecutor blamed her for committing a crime of prostitution. Now, the transcripts are from a 2006 grand jury investigation, and these documents contain first-hand accounts from victims, including payoffs. But the jurors followed the prosecutor's lead by asking questions in a rather accusatory tone. One juror asked a victim who had been 14 at the time, quote, "Do you have any idea deep down inside of you that what you're doing is wrong?" And the victim then answered, "Yeah, I did." Despite the testimony, Epstein cut a deal in 2008 to avoid charges of sex trafficking and rape. Epstein ultimately took his own life in a Manhattan jail in 2019 while awaiting trial over federal sex trafficking charges linked to a separate case. We want to take a look at some of the top stories from our stations across the country. In Pittsburgh, we're looking at the reopening of a juvenile detention center. CBS News Pittsburgh reporter Megan Shin has more.
There's some excitement today because judges have had no place to send young offenders who are accused of some of the most serious crimes in our city, including gun and violence-related crimes, for the past 3 years. Since the Schumann Center closed, we know that delayed intervention for young offenders and compromised community safety has happened in the area. As a result, there were 436 incidents where juveniles cut off their electronic monitoring bracelets or let the batteries die between 2022 and January of this year. Between December 2021 and October 2023, 234 youth in Allegheny County met the criteria for secure detention or were court-ordered to detention, but they were not detained because there wasn't enough space. Once the additional renovation to the center is completed, they will have 5 12-bed pods available, meaning they will have a total capacity for 60 juvenile offenders there. In Pittsburgh, Megan Shin, CBS News.
Well, there were some significant delays for passengers at Newark's International Airport. We're going to explain what was behind the travel headaches and why the FAA is getting involved. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at the top stories we are following. Passengers and crew members experienced some terrifying moments in the air after severe turbulence struck an Air Europa flight yesterday. This plane was going from Madrid to Uruguay but had to make an emergency landing after this turbulence sent people flying through the cabin. At least 30 people are injured. Hundreds of firefighters are battling wildfires on 2 Greek islands. Emergency services issued evacuation orders for residents on the eastern Aegean islands of Chios and Kos. Greece's prime minister is warning of a dangerous summer ahead and is urging the public to help prevent wildfires. There is still disruption at auto dealerships nearly 2 weeks after a major cyber attack on CDK Global. The software company provides services to about 15,000 car dealerships across the country. The company says that it expects impacted dealers to regain access to their platform no later than this Thursday, July 4th. By the way, this attack has cut dealerships' June sales by more than 7%, according to J.D. Power. Well, we are keeping a close eye on Hurricane Beryl, the Category 5 storm currently making its way across the Caribbean islands, bringing coastal flooding and strong winds to the region, ripping doors, windows, even roofs right off of homes. It is now forecast to bring life-threatening winds and storm surge to Jamaica, and that is where we find Tom Hansen. Tom, what do we know so far?
Hey there, Lindsay. Well, we're standing down on this beach, and as you can see, people are going about their business as usual. A lot of tourists are here out in the water today because you can see this glassy, calm stretch of the ocean, but that is not going to be the case tomorrow. Just want to touch the water. This is warm to the touch. Now, that's not a good sign for this hurricane because it's going to use that warm water and it's going to intensify or potentially intensify. Now, you may be wondering why we're on the western side of this island as opposed to the eastern side, which is going to bear the brunt of the first wave of bands that are going to hit Jamaica. That's because this is considered to be the dirty side of the island. Once that storm passes, that storm is going to push all of this wind and all of this storm surge into this area. And that's a huge concern because, as you know, Lindsay, that storm surge is oftentimes one of the most devastating impacts of any hurricane. So the people here are taking this very seriously. You know, the mayor of Montego Bay over here on the west side, he says this is not a cry wolf scenario. This is something that they are 100% prepared for, and they do not want people to fall into a delusion. When you look at this beautiful paradise today, you may think the storm's not going to be that bad, but come tomorrow, that is not going to be the case, Lindsay.
Okay, Tom, appreciate you and your crew bringing that to us. Thank you. For more on Hurricane Beryl's forecast, let's go ahead and bring in CBS Miami meteorologist Casey Sherman.
Yes, Hurricane Beryl strengthened into a Category 5 hurricane overnight after making landfall along the Windward Islands yesterday. It now marks the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record, and a very powerful storm at that. 165-mile-per-hour max sustained winds. Those outer bands have been pushing through Puerto Rico at the center, well to the south of it. It's currently moving quickly to the west-northwest at 22 miles per hour, and eventually it'll be tracking across the central Caribbean. We now have Jamaica under a hurricane warning. Those cases Cayman Islands now under a hurricane watch, where you have tropical storm warnings out in effect for portions of Hispaniola. Beryl will continue to work its way quickly off to the west-northwest, where we are anticipating some weakening. It's going to be encountering some wind shear along with some dry air, but still expected to bring impacts to Jamaica tomorrow as a major Category 3 hurricane. Life-threatening winds, storm surge, and flash flooding, all threats that they'll be watching out for tomorrow. This will continue to work its way off to the west-northwest heading into Thursday and Friday, continuing to weaken as it approaches the Yucatan Peninsula by the end of the week, where it then will be emerging across the southern Gulf of Mexico as a weaker, likely tropical storm heading into the upcoming weekend. We now have that forecast cone extending out through northeastern portions of Mexico and even the far southern tip of Texas, Brownsville now included within that forecast cone, as they will have to watch the path of Beryl closely. That area of high pressure that's been keeping it on this westerly track will eventually slide eastward, opening up the door for Beryl to make a turn off to the north once it approaches the Gulf of Mexico. So everyone from northeastern Mexico up through the Gulf Coast of Texas will have to watch Beryl as we head into the weekend. Lindsay.
Thanks, Casey. Let's go ahead and bring in CBS News meteorologist Andrew Kozak with a look at what the rest of the nation is facing. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Lindsay. Yeah, we are, of course, watching Beryl as the big story. And as we talked about, we're going to be looking at areas across Texas that will be giving us a look at maybe later on in the week and the weekend for Beryl to potentially affect. In the meantime, let's put the clouds on and take a look at the rest of the nation. We don't have a whole lot to talk about when it comes to precipitation in the midsection of the country or the northeast. It's a beautiful day. It is just going to be a pretty hot day across much of the area. There's Beryl right, by the way, just down there in the Caribbean. You can see that large area of clouds. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the really intense heat that we have coming our way for today. We're starting things off first with temperatures this afternoon that will be in the 90s and 100s. Take a look at some of the high temperatures. New Orleans, 95 degrees. You know how intensely hot it will feel down in the deep south. Dallas, 101. And as we walk over here, Albuquerque, temperatures in the 80s. We have temperatures in the 90s for Phoenix right now, but 112 degrees this afternoon. And even for the desert Southwest, these temperatures are well above average. Let's take a look at the country coast to coast, because we do have some dangerous heat. And we have watches, advisories, and warnings in effect for much of California right now. We're going to start things off first with that West Coast and take a look at what we're seeing. So overall, what we're going to continue to watch for across the West Coast are temperatures that could get anywhere between 110 and 115 for how it feels out there, which is why we have plenty of excessive heat warnings across the area. And that will include much of inland California and much of the area just inland from the coast. Meantime, as we make our way into the Midwest and the deep south, look at all the heat advisories from basically the panhandle of Florida all the way up to areas like Kansas City, Wichita, Kansas, and back toward Dallas. Then we even have excessive heat warnings and watches for areas across the Gulf Coast, and that will include New Orleans, where again temperatures today will be in the 90s. Holiday travel forecast today. A lot of us will be traveling Tuesday, Wednesday, the big travel days. We have triple-digit heat up and down the Midwest. 102 for areas like Dallas, Oklahoma City. We'll continue to watch that into your Wednesday, and then we're going to track some showers and storms for the eastern half of the country as we head into your 4th of July.
All right, Andrew, thanks so much. We are following updates out of Newark Airport this morning in New Jersey. Flights are back to normal at Newark Liberty International after they had been slowed overnight due to an air traffic controller shortage. CBS News reporter, New York reporter rather, Elijah Westbrook is following this story for us. Elijah, what do we know about what happened and what ripple effects it caused? Because I know Newark is a big hub for some of these airlines.
Yeah, and it's a great question, Lindsay. Good to be with you. So thankfully, this air traffic controller shortage is currently not impacting flyers here in our immediate area, including Newark Airport, as you mentioned. But yesterday, certainly a different story, right? I mean, the shortage caused significant backups, an FAA ground stop at Newark Airport Monday evening. At one point, pilots were directed to stay airborne before they could even land. In some cases, we're being told for up to 2 hours. Now, Lindsay, as you know, this is expected to be a busy week at the airports with people traveling for the 4th of July holiday. Plus, the Caribbean is dealing with Hurricane Beryl, which is already impacting flights there. So talk about just bad timing for this to all take place. But again, operations appear to be normal as we speak.
Okay, appreciate that live report, Elijah. Thank you so much. House Speaker Mike Johnson is dismissing Democrats' concerns over that Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity, calling their fears of what could happen after the decision, quote, madness.
First, they weaponized the Department of Justice to go after his chief political opponent, which, of course, is Donald Trump. And now, when it doesn't work the way they planned it, the way they designed it, when the law gets in the way of what they're trying to do, now he's trying to undermine the Supreme Court itself. There's all sorts of hyperbole tonight and just this fantastical, these hypotheticals they've made up. Future presidents are going to turn into assassins and all the rest. It's madness.
Scott McFarland joins us now with more. So, Scott, what are you hearing from lawmakers about this decision?
Oh, there is no muddy middle on this one. It has been a visceral, vitriolic set of responses from Democrats and some championing of this decision from Republicans. We can give you a sample of it. This is just a sample. Our inboxes have been inundated with responses from office holders. The New Jersey Democrat Bill Pascrell said this is maybe the most dangerous opinion from the Supreme Court in generations. His New York colleague, Dan Goldman, says it was a dark day for American democracy. You can just read these things. You can feel the heat coming off the statements. Goldman continues, it's perhaps the final nail in the coffin of a rogue Supreme Court. Eric Swalwell's a Democrat from California, saying, don't panic on Trump immunity case. Jack Smith will argue Trump's actions were not official acts. Let me give you a flavor of the Republican responses from Trump ally, Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, who chairs the House Judiciary Committee. He says hyper-partisan prosecutors like Jack Smith cannot weaponize the rule of law to go after the administration's chief political rival. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, an ardent ally of the former president as well, says the ruling from the Supreme Court ends the insane 2020 election case against President Trump once and for all and is a great victory. Also, the fallout should include some of these Don Quixote-esque legislative attempts by Democrats to try to counter the response of the Supreme Court. In one new bill, they're threatening to impeach members of the Supreme Court. That's on a road to nowhere. Another one proposes stacking the court, adding new justices. That's on an even faster road to nowhere. These are somewhat predictable responses, but I think the scope and size of the Supreme Court ruling has added heat to the partisan divide.
Scott, I know this is only some of the congressional reaction you're following. There's also growing reaction to President Biden and the state of his campaign. What are you learning?
Yeah, that's a little bit muddier. Some of this is equivocating. Some of this is lacking in meat, but it's noteworthy that there are some, either former or current members of Congress, who've raised the question as to whether his team is responding properly, whether he is responding properly to Thursday night's debate meltdown. So many office holders who are Democrats have kept their powder dry on this. They don't want to be the first to question the future of the president. But a few names to throw out there. Former Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, who was a high-profile Democratic candidate for a Senate seat in Ohio after he departed the U.S. House, has specifically said Kamala Harris should be the nominee, the Democratic Party. Not a current office holder, but somebody who cuts a high profile in the party. There have been questions raised from a few members of Congress with whom CBS News is speaking about whether the Biden team has responded properly to Thursday, whether the president should be doing more, should be doing interviews, should be doing news conferences, should be doing town halls. Those questions are likely to grow, not shrink.
Okay, Scott, we know you'll track it all. Thanks. Well, several U.S. military bases are on heightened alert for a possible terror attack. What we know about the threats. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We now want to take you to Washington, where Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is hosting an event for the Ukrainian defense minister. Let's listen in.
Continuing partnership. Now, Ukraine is in a tough fight and has been ever since the start of Putin's reckless war of choice. The Kremlin continues to intensify its bombardment of your cities and civilians. But I continue to be impressed by the skill of your forces, and your troops continue to fend off Russia's attacks with grit, ingenuity, and courage. So make no mistake, Ukraine is not alone, and the United States will never waver in our support. Alongside some 50 allies and partners, we'll continue to provide the critical capabilities that Ukraine needs to push back Russian aggression today and to deter Russian aggression tomorrow. And I am proud that the United States will soon announce more than $2.3 billion in new security assistance for Ukraine. This package, under presidential drawdown authority, will provide more air defense interceptors, anti-tank weapons, and other critical munitions from U.S. inventories. It will also enable the United States to procure more Patriot NASAMS, air defense interceptors, which will be provided on an accelerated timeline by the resequencing of deliveries for some foreign military sales. Now, as we look ahead to the NATO summit next week, Rustam, we'll take steps to build a bridge to NATO membership.
That was Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon talking about the support for Ukraine in their fight against the war in Russia, announcing new aid as well as new Patriot defense missiles. We'll stay on top of this and bring you news as it comes out. American military bases in Europe are on heightened alert, according to U.S. officials, amid growing concerns of a possible terrorist attack in the coming weeks. Let's bring in CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano following this for us. Lilia, what's causing this concern? Is it typical for this time of year around the July 4th holiday?
Well, Lindsay, there's actually a lot happening in Europe at the moment. On top of the usual flow of summer travel from Americans, you have Wimbledon here, you have Germany that's currently hosting the Euro Cup. The final of the Euro Cup will take place in Berlin on July 14th. Less than 2 weeks after that, you have the Olympics in Paris. So military bases in Germany in particular, including the headquarters of U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, as well as other bases in Germany, some of their installations in Romania, Bulgaria, and the Aviano Air Base in Italy are all under threat level Charlie. So that is the second level of protection. It goes Alpha, Beta, Charlie, and Delta, with Delta, of course, being the most severe. What this means is that there was either an incident or intelligence that led defense officials to suspect some form of terrorist activity is, quote, likely. Not quite imminent, but likely. So for military personnel and their families, that means security bases, the security is increased in bases. Some services will be unavailable. Some non-essential personnel may be working remotely, and this is all for the foreseeable future. They didn't give an end date or anything of that nature. This also means that officials are advising service members and their families to stay vigilant abroad, to keep an eye on the State Department's advisories, take extra safety precautions, and support any suspicious activity. And of course, this also goes, as you mentioned, it's July 4th for Americans abroad and here in the U.S. Just a few weeks ago, the FBI Director Christopher Wray warned that the terrorism lights are blinking red again in the United States, and compared this moment to the timeline leading up to 9/11.
Wow, what a warning. Okay. Lilia, thanks for your reporting. Illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border fell to a 3-year low last month. This is the lowest level under the Biden administration. Around 84,000 unauthorized migrants were processed in June, the fourth consecutive monthly drop. That's according to preliminary Customs and Border Protection data. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Panama signed an agreement yesterday allowing American officials to help their government deport migrants crossing the Duranian Gap. This is a popular transit point for people traveling to the U.S. southern border. We are continuing to follow Hurricane Beryl's path as this deadly storm churns toward Jamaica after barreling through the Caribbean. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The advertising world is betting that more Americans actually favor unity and compromise than division amid a contentious battle between Donald Trump and Joe Biden ahead of the November presidential election. CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett looks at the race for the White House through a different lens, not Pennsylvania Avenue, but Madison Avenue.
Everything Joe Biden touches turns to
that other guy, that loser.
The state of our politics inflamed, vulgar, antagonistic.
Anger and outrage are biologically addictive.
Jamie Schmelzer is not a mental health professional. Schmelzer sells sausage as a marketing executive for meat processing giant Johnsonville.
We do not pretend that we have what it takes to save America. We know the world is full of serious problems that sausage can't solve. We couldn't keep up.
But Schmelzer and Johnsonville believe they're onto something.
What if instead of keeping it angsty, we all keep it juicy?
The company's new ad campaign begs Americans to turn down the temperature, to find common ground and chill.
Kiss outrage goodbye. Say hello to more outreach.
Is this campaign political?
We think this campaign is cultural more than political, but we also fully recognize that those two things have become kind of inseparable.
Johnsonville had a hunch the country was on edge. It took a stab at something politicians do, polling, and found that 8 out of 10 Americans are exhausted by the anger and negativity in the country, and that many Americans are getting together less than they used to.
Is isolation good for your product?
No. So Johnsonville makes hangout food. We like to say that Sausage for One almost doesn't exist.
And it's not just Johnsonville preaching calm and togetherness.
That's great. It is both. It is both.
You can find similar echoes in Miller Lite and Lazy Boy's ad campaigns.
We're standing up for our right to be lazy.
Selling less fighting and more relaxation.
They're paying attention to our own thoughts as a society.
Andrew Cohen is a cultural sociologist who specializes in advertising.
It's a great place for these brands to play of saying, you know, we can't deny the reality that people are heated, that it's really hard to go to your family's cookout and not get in a fight with your uncle over some political views that you don't agree about.
We can find common ground.
We traveled to 2 battleground states, Georgia and Wisconsin, to show voters the ads and ask how they view the country.
Everyone in the country feels a little on edge.
Everybody's anxiety and emotions are high, and we just need to chill.
People seem to isolate themselves too much. Isolation, it's a bad thing, you know.
That matches Johnsonville's research and recent warnings from the Surgeon General about the, quote, epidemic of loneliness and the toxicity of social media.
It's a lot of drama everywhere.
It is both.
The advertisers hope that bridge building and slowing down is a message that sells to an anxious nation in short supply of unity.
Laughter, our shared language again.
It's kind of a pep talk for America to remember to just make time, take a break, and have some fun with some people that you like.
When marketing wades into deep waters of national anxiety and estrangement, something has shifted. Something our summer of political strife is unlikely to settle. I'm Major Garrett in Johnsonville, Wisconsin.
We have some breaking news. The Associated Press is reporting the U.S. will pay Moderna $176 million to develop a pandemic vaccine that could be used to treat people with bird flu. Now, this flu was detected in dairy cows earlier this year. It's spread to 12 states. There have been 3 cases in humans in the U.S. this year. But health officials say the threat to the general population, remains low. All right, let's go ahead and bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with a look at Hurricane Beryl. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is it is still a major Category 5 hurricane, Lindsay. In fact, this has been one for the record books. It was the first one to form as a Category 4 so early in the season in June, and it's the quickest one to ever reach Category 5 here on just July 2nd. So there it is right now. There's the Windward Islands already passed by, and now it's making a beeline for areas like Jamaica. The current stats, over 150 to 160 miles per hour right now, and we have gusts over 200 miles per hour. This is a very impressive storm tracked through the Windward Islands, and we're going to take this now through what potentially could be a direct hit for Jamaica. It would be better if it went a little bit further north and, of course, went just to the south. That's going to give it a little bit more of a stronghold on Jamaica. So we're hoping that it doesn't do this, but right now this would take it through Jamaica and then eventually the Yucatan Peninsula by the time we get to Thursday. Beyond that, it may weaken to a tropical storm, but we're also going to be watching now for Mexico and the Gulf Coast, including Brownsville and much of southern Texas. Back here in the States, 4th of July forecast, it is going to be searing hot in the deep south. Temperatures will be in the 90s and 100s, feeling as hot as 110. Same thing in the desert southwest. The beautiful part of the country to be this Thursday for July 4th would be in the Pacific Northwest. Lindsay, keep it here, CBS 24/7, as we track the holiday forecast and the latest on Beryl.
All right, Andrew, appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us for CBS News 24/7. I'm going to be back at noon for midday highlights. Up next, an encore of CBS Mornings. Thanks for being with us. This is CBS News 24/7.